Have you ever had a moment, a single shattering instant, where the entire foundation of your reality crumbled beneath your feet? A blink of an eye revelation that rewrites your past, present, and future? It's a primal fear, isn't it? The fear of the unknown, of betrayal from the very people you trust most. Your brain, wired for safety and predictability, suddenly screams in protest as the world you meticulously built collapses. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about the raw, visceral shock of discovering that everything you believed was a carefully constructed lie. It's about the moment your deepest sense of security is ripped away, leaving you gasping for air in the wreckage. Imagine walking into your own home, a place you consider your sanctuary, only to find the two people you loved and trusted most intimately entwined. Not just in a moment of weakness, but in a calculated deception. The blood runs cold, doesn't it? That knot in your stomach, the sudden rush of adrenaline, the fight or flight response kicking in. But what if, in that very instant of profound betrayal, something unexpected awakens within you? A quiet, terrifying calm that replaces the expected screams and tears. What if, instead of collapsing, you find a strength you never knew you possessed? A clarity that allows you to lock the door, not just on them, but on the old version of yourself. This is my story, a journey from blind trust to an awakening so profound, it reshaped my entire existence. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. The morning had begun like any other, a symphony of familiar routines that lulled me into a false sense of security. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of my husband's aftershave, a comforting blend that had defined our mornings for nearly a decade. I remember watching the sunrise paint the kitchen in hues of soft orange and pink, feeling a quiet contentment settle deep within my soul. Our home, a charming 2-story house nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of our shared dreams, a sanctuary meticulously crafted with love and countless hours of careful planning. Every piece of furniture, every splash of paint on the walls, held a story, a memory of a life I believed was perfectly aligned with my deepest desires. My husband, Ethan, was a man of quiet strength, or so I thought. He worked from home most days, a freelance architect whose dedication to his craft was something I deeply admired. We had built a life together that felt unshakable, a partnership founded on mutual respect, unwavering trust, and a shared vision for our future. Our neighbors, especially Sarah and Mark, who lived directly across the street, were an extension of our family. Sarah, with her infectious laugh and boundless energy, had become my confidant, my go-to for everything from borrowing a cup of sugar to sharing the intimate details of our lives over Sunday morning coffee. We had vacationed together, celebrated holidays, and navigated the small, everyday challenges of suburban life as a united front. That particular Tuesday, however, carried a subtle undercurrent of unease, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious melody of my day. Ethan had been unusually distracted during breakfast, his eyes constantly darting to his phone, a nervous energy radiating from him that I couldn't quite place. When I gently inquired if everything was all right, he offered vague assurances, dismissing my concerns with a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A tiny seed of doubt, no bigger than a mustard seed, began to sprout in the fertile ground of my subconscious, a feeling I instinctively pushed away, attributing it to my own overactive imagination, or perhaps just a stressful week at work. My job as a marketing consultant often demanded my full attention, pulling me into a whirlwind of meetings and deadlines. That morning, as I navigated the familiar commute to my office, the nagging feeling persisted, a faint hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I tried to focus on the upcoming presentations, on the strategies I needed to finalize, but a strange restlessness gnawed at me. Around lunchtime, a sudden realization struck me. I had left crucial documents for an afternoon client meeting at home, papers I absolutely needed to present. There was no other option but to make the quick 15-minute drive back, a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things, or so I believed. I called Ethan to let him know I was heading home, but his line was busy, a small detail that, in retrospect, should have screamed a warning. I left a quick voicemail, explaining my unexpected return, and then set off, my mind already racing through the tasks awaiting me back at the office. The drive was uneventful, the familiar streets passing by in a blur. I pictured myself grabbing the documents, perhaps sharing a quick sandwich with Ethan, and then heading straight back to work, my day seamlessly resuming its planned trajectory. Life, however, has a peculiar way of orchestrating its most profound lessons in the most mundane of moments, often when we least expect them, shattering our carefully constructed illusions with a single, brutal stroke. As I pulled into our driveway, a jarring sight immediately caught my eye, sending a jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. Sarah's car, her distinctive silver SUV, was parked not across the street in her own driveway, but directly in mine, angled awkwardly as if in a rush. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a premonition of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The house, usually alive with the soft hum of Ethan's music, or the gentle clatter of his work, was eerily silent. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat echoing the growing alarm in my mind. What could possibly be happening that would lead to such an unusual and unsettling scene? The silence that greeted me as I unlocked the front door was not the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but a heavy, suffocating stillness that pressed in on me from all sides. It was the kind of silence that screams volumes, a void where laughter or conversation should have been. "Ethan," I called out, my voice sounding strangely small and uncertain in the vast emptiness of the hallway. No answer. I walked through the living room, then into the kitchen, my eyes scanning every corner, searching for any sign of life, any logical explanation for Sarah's car and the profound quiet. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink, exactly as I had left them that morning, a tiny detail that felt profoundly out of place, a disruption in the predictable order of our home. My mind, desperate to cling to normalcy, raced through a series of increasingly improbable scenarios. Perhaps Sarah had just dropped something off for Ethan and left quickly. Maybe she had a plumbing emergency and needed to use our bathroom. But even as these thoughts formed, a deeper, more primal instinct screamed a different truth. Then, a sound, faint but unmistakable, pierced the oppressive silence, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air conditioning. It was the distinct sound of running water, coming from upstairs, from our master bathroom, the private sanctuary Ethan and I had shared for nearly a decade. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My first, most innocent thought was that Ethan was simply taking a shower, perhaps unwinding during a break from work. But then, the questions began to multiply, each one a sharp, insistent jab to my carefully constructed reality. Where was Sarah? Why was her car here if she wasn't? Why the silence downstairs if two people were supposedly in the house? The pieces didn't fit, creating a terrifying mosaic of confusion and dread. Each step I took towards the stairs felt heavy, laden with an unspoken weight, as if I were ascending not just to the second floor, but towards an inevitable, life-altering precipice. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I climbed the stairs, my mind still frantically grasping for any rational explanation. Maybe Sarah had come over to borrow something, and Ethan, ever the gentleman, had offered her our bathroom because hers was broken. Perhaps there was some unforeseen emergency, a reason I couldn't possibly comprehend that necessitated her showering in our home. My brain, in its desperate attempt to protect me from an unbearable truth, clung to these flimsy justifications, trying to keep my happy world intact, to prevent the cracks from spreading into a full-blown chasm. As I reached the top of the stairs, the sound of the running water grew louder, more insistent, and then another sound, one that froze the blood in my veins and shattered every last vestige of my denial. Voices, quiet, intimate whispers, weaving in and out of the steady rush of water. Not the casual chatter of friends, but something far more insidious, far more personal. My hand trembled as I approached our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping from the bathroom beyond. A part of me, the part that craved ignorance and the preservation of my peace, screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to flee. "Don't open that door," a desperate voice echoed in my mind, "because deep down, you already know what you'll find on the other side, and it will change everything forever." But another part of me, a fierce, unyielding need for the truth, no matter how devastating, propelled me forward. It was a force stronger than fear, a primal urge to confront the monster lurking in the shadows of my perfect life. I placed my hand on the cool metal of the doorknob, took a deep, shuddering breath that felt like my last, and with a movement that seemed to happen in agonizing slow motion, I gently pushed the door open, bracing myself for the inevitable revelation that lay beyond. The world held its breath with me. What I saw on the other side of that door was not merely a betrayal. It was the brutal, undeniable death of the woman I had been up until that very moment. There is no manual, no guide, no amount of preparation that can equip you for the instant your entire reality dissolves into a grotesque, unrecognizable tableau. It's a sensory overload, a horrifying kaleidoscope of images and emotions that assaults every fiber of your being. There they were, Ethan and Sarah, in my bathtub, in my home, in my sanctuary. Their bodies were intertwined, oblivious to the world outside their bubble of deceit, lost in a stolen intimacy that felt like a violation of my very soul. The water cascaded over them, a cruel mockery of purity, as they kissed with a fervent passion I hadn't seen from Ethan in years. His hands roamed over her body with a familiarity that spoke volumes, a silent testament to a history far deeper and more insidious than a single impulsive mistake. In that initial, paralyzing moment, my brain simply refused to process the scene unfolding before my eyes. It was as if I were watching a surreal, slow-motion film, something detached and unreal, something that simply could not be happening in the meticulously ordered narrative of my life. A strange, disorienting fog enveloped me, blurring the edges of reality. Then, as if on cue, Sarah opened her eyes, and her gaze met mine. The transformation on her face was instantaneous and horrifying, from lust to pure, unadulterated terror. Her gasp, a small, choked sound, ripped through the silence, pulling Ethan's attention towards the doorway. When his eyes landed on me, his body froze, every muscle tensing in a grotesque tableau of guilt and shock. "Eleanor," he stammered, my name escaping his lips like a desperate plea, as if merely uttering it could magically undo the unspeakable truth that had just been laid bare. In that precise, agonizing instant, something inside me irrevocably shattered, but it wasn't the expected heartbreak. It wasn't the crushing despair I had anticipated. Instead, it was the chains of the submissive, trusting woman I had been for so long that snapped, releasing me from a self-imposed prison of naivete. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse into a heap of tears and anguish, as they undoubtedly expected. A strange, almost supernatural calm descended upon me, a chilling composure that felt both alien and profoundly empowering. It was as if I had stepped outside my own body, observing the scene from a detached, almost clinical distance, completely unburdened by the torrent of emotions I was supposed to feel. "Stay exactly where you are," I heard myself say, my voice a low, steady murmur I barely recognized as my own. It was cold, controlled, and imbued with an unexpected power that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Ethan, in a desperate, fumbling attempt to salvage the unsalvageable, tried to scramble out of the tub. "Eleanor, wait. I can explain," he pleaded, his voice thick with panic. "Don't move," I repeated, my tone unwavering, and something in the absolute finality of my command made him stop instantly, his body suspended in a grotesque half-climb, water dripping from his skin onto the pristine bathroom tiles. With a decisive, almost theatrical movement, I closed the bathroom door, the soft click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the sudden, heavy silence. Without a moment's hesitation, my hand found the key, and I turned it in the lock. The metallic click resonated through the house, a definitive punctuation mark on the end of an era. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Sarah's voice, now laced with raw panic, sounded muffled and desperate from behind the locked door. "Stay in there," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, "and think about what you've done. In the meantime, I have a few phone calls to make." A chilling resolve settled over me, a clarity of purpose I had never known. The game had changed, and I was no longer a pawn. I walked to my nightstand, the same nightstand where Ethan and I had placed our phones every night for years, a symbol of our supposed transparency. My fingers, surprisingly steady, found my cell phone, and I scrolled through my contacts, searching for a number I had dialed hundreds of times for trivial matters: dinner invitations, neighborhood gatherings, casual chats about garden projects, but never, not in my wildest nightmares, for something like this. My gaze landed on Mark, Sarah's husband, and a wave of cold determination washed over me. He deserved the truth, just as much as I did. Mark answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hello, Eleanor. How are you?" he asked, his usual warmth a stark contrast to the icy calm that now enveloped me. "Hello, Mark," I replied, my voice still possessing that terrifying, controlled steadiness. "I need you here at my house immediately. There's something you need to see." I offered no further explanation, no hint of the cataclysm that awaited him. The abruptness of my call, the unusual tone in my voice must have registered, because his cheerful demeanor instantly evaporated, replaced by a note of genuine concern. He promised to be over as quickly as possible. While I waited for Mark to arrive, I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, the very bed Ethan and I had shared for 8 years, a silent witness to countless nights of intimacy and whispered dreams. It was there, in the quiet solitude of our bedroom, that the full, crushing weight of reality began to settle upon me. The signs, subtle at first, then increasingly blatant, had been there all along, weaving themselves into the fabric of our daily lives, and I, in my blind trust, had dismissed every single one. Ethan working from home more often, his gym sessions growing longer and more frequent, the way he'd suddenly become possessive of his phone, quickly tucking it away whenever I approached, and Sarah, sweet, vivacious Sarah, who always found excuses to pop over when Ethan was home, who had recently started dressing with a new, almost provocative flair, especially on the days I was at the office. She knew details about Ethan's routine, his preferences, his subtle habits, that I had never shared with her. Desperate whispers and muffled thuds now emanated from the bathroom, punctuated by the sound of gentle knocking on the door. "Eleanor, please, this is insanity." Ethan's voice, laced with a pathetic urgency, cut through the door. "Let us out so we can talk like adults." Adults. I repeated the word silently, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat. Adults were the ones sleeping with their neighbor's spouse in their own wife's house. Adults were the ones constructing elaborate webs of lies to conceal their betrayal. My phone vibrated, pulling me from my thoughts. A message from Mark. "On my way, almost there. Everything okay?" I replied, telling him to just come inside, that I would explain everything when he arrived. In those agonizing minutes of waiting, a new, cold resolve solidified within me. I had to know the full extent of their deception. Ethan had left his phone on the nightstand when he went to shower. After 8 years of marriage, we had prided ourselves on total transparency, a cruel irony that now mocked me. There was no passcode. My fingers, still surprisingly steady, navigated to his messaging app. What I found there confirmed my darkest fears, and then some. This betrayal went far deeper, far more calculated than I could have ever imagined. The messages between Ethan and Sarah stretch back more than 6 months, a sickening chronicle of their affair, meticulously documented in digital ink. 6 months. 6 months of "good morning, beautiful," and "I can't stop thinking about you." 6 months of carefully orchestrated plans to meet when I was conveniently out of the house, their clandestine rendezvous woven into the fabric of my unsuspecting life. 6 months of them laughing about how clueless I was, how easy it was to deceive me. "Eleanor is so naive," Sarah had written in one particularly venomous exchange. "I think we could do it in the living room and she wouldn't even notice." Ethan's reply, a chilling testament to his depravity, echoed in my mind. "That's what I love about you. You're the opposite of her. Adventurous, spontaneous, fun." But the message that truly tore me apart, ripping through my soul with a jagged edge, was one from just 2 days prior. "Do you think we should tell them?" Sarah had asked, a fleeting flicker of guilt, perhaps, in her digital words. "Sometimes I feel guilty about Eleanor. She's such a good person." Ethan's response, cold and calculating, solidified the depth of their treachery. "Not yet. I need to make sure she doesn't take half of everything in the divorce when I break up with her. Give me a few more weeks." I read that message 3 times, the words slowly, painfully sinking into my brain, each syllable a fresh wound. They weren't just cheating on me. They were actively plotting to financially ruin me, to leave me with absolutely nothing. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that jolted me back to the present. Mark was here. I walked down the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me, clutching Ethan's phone tightly in my hand, a digital weapon of undeniable truth. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see Mark standing on our porch, his brow furrowed with concern, his posture radiating a visible worry about my mysterious call. Mark was a good man, a devoted husband and father, completely infatuated with Sarah. I had seen him with his children, patiently teaching them to ride bikes, staying up all night when they were sick, his love for his family palpable and unwavering. He deserved the truth, no matter how devastating. I opened the door, and Mark's eyes, usually so warm and full of life, met mine, reflecting genuine concern. He was still in his work uniform, a plant manager, likely having rushed straight from a job site to see what emergency I had. "Eleanor, what's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with apprehension. "You sounded very serious on the phone. Is everything okay?" For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. As soon as I spoke the words, there would be no turning back. Mark's life, his carefully constructed world, would also shatter into a million pieces. His children would have to grapple with the fallout of their parents divorcing. His entire sense of self, his trust, would collapse, just as mine had. But he deserved the truth. He deserved to know the depths of his wife's betrayal, just as I had. "Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "Sarah is here, inside my house, with my husband." I caught them together. I watched as the words, heavy with their devastating meaning, took a few agonizing seconds to land in Mark's brain. His expression shifted, a horrifying progression from concern to confusion, then to disbelief, and finally, to a painful, gut-wrenching understanding that I recognized perfectly because I had just endured the very same transformation. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. "What do you mean, together?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, even though his eyes already knew the answer, already understood the unspeakable implication of my tone. "I found them in my bathtub," I answered softly, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I locked them inside. They're waiting for us to decide what we're going to do." The weight of those words hung in the air, a suffocating blanket of shared betrayal. Mark leaned heavily against the doorframe, as if the bones in his legs had suddenly turned to water. His face, usually so vibrant, now completely ashen, drained of all color and life. "How long?" Mark murmured, his voice barely audible, a fragile whisper against the humming of the air conditioning. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain, and the crushing weight of a future irrevocably altered. Without a word, I handed him Ethan's smartphone, the screen still displaying the incriminating text messages, a digital ledger of their deceit. According to what I had just read, it had been going on for at least 6 months, perhaps even longer, a secret life meticulously woven into the fabric of our unsuspecting existence. As Mark scrolled through the thread, his trembling fingers navigating the damning evidence, I watched his world disintegrate in real time, a mirror image of my own recent devastation. It was the same hollow look I must have worn only minutes prior, that same devastating mixture of disbelief and betrayal, the sickening realization that the life you thought was solid ground was actually quicksand, pulling you down into an abyss of lies. "Oh my God," he whispered, bringing a trembling hand to his mouth, his eyes wide with a horror that transcended mere anger. "The kids. Eleanor, how am I supposed to explain this to the kids?" It was the first time since walking into that bathroom that I witnessed someone else experiencing the raw, jagged edge of this pain, and strangely, in that shared moment of profound agony, I felt a tiny spark of connection, a sense of being less alone in this waking nightmare. We moved downstairs to the living room, needing to distance ourselves from the physical proximity of our spouses, from the locked bathroom that now felt like a cage holding our shattered past. We sat on my beige sectional, surrounded by framed memories that now felt like they were mocking us, each photograph a cruel reminder of a life that was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. There were photos of Ethan and me cutting our wedding cake, images of our 2 families on vacation together at the beach, snapshots from Christmas parties where we were all laughing in matching pajamas, pretending to be one big, happy clan. It had all been a performance, a meticulously staged play with us as the unwitting audience. "I need to understand," Mark said, his voice cracking with a raw emotion that resonated deeply within me. "When did this start? How could I have been so blind?" We huddled together over Ethan's phone, scrolling back through the endless stream of messages, piecing together a timeline of their treason, each text a painful revelation. The first truly romantic exchange had happened the night of a dinner party, right here in this house. A night I remembered perfectly because we had laughed until our sides hurt, played board games, and finished 3 bottles of wine. Apparently, after Mark and I had gone to sleep, Ethan had walked Sarah back to her house, and that was where the line was irrevocably crossed. A stolen kiss on her front porch, while her children slept upstairs, and her husband trusted her completely. The messages revealed a sordid map of their infidelity, a clandestine world built on lies and deception. There were meetups in cheap motels off the interstate during my work hours, quick encounters in Sarah's SUV in secluded park and ride lots, and even trysts in my own home on days when I had all-day executive meetings. "Look at this," Mark said, pointing to a timestamp with a shaking finger, his voice barely a whisper. "Last Saturday, I took the boys to the zoo because Sarah said she had a migraine. A wave of nausea washed over me. That same Saturday, Ethan had told me he was going to play pickup basketball at the gym with the guys. He had come home sweating and exhausted, and I, in my innocence, had believed he had been exercising. They had perfected the art of deception, synchronizing their lies, providing each other with bulletproof alibis, weaving a web of deceit so intricate it would have impressed a professional con artist. But what cut the deepest, what truly twisted the knife in my gut, wasn't just the physical details of their affair. It was the cold, calculated planning. Ethan had been coldly plotting how to leave me with absolutely nothing, researching divorce loopholes in our state, looking up how to hide assets in cryptocurrency accounts, and asking his lawyer buddies for strategies to protect his 401k in case of a split. The betrayal was not just of the heart, but of every single aspect of our shared life, a deliberate act of financial and emotional sabotage. Then we found something that shifted the atmosphere in the room from profound sadness to chilling terror. Among the most recent texts, we discovered that Ethan and Sarah weren't just planning their respective divorces, they were actively planning to merge their lives, to build a future together on the ashes of our shattered marriages. "I found the perfect townhouse," Sarah had written, her words a sickening echo of the dreams I once shared with Ethan. 3 bedrooms so the boys can visit. It's in the catchment area for the magnet school, just in case we decide to fight for full custody later. "Perfect," Ethan had replied, his callousness a punch to the gut. "As soon as I'm free of Eleanor and you drop Mark, we can start our real life. No more secrets, no more lies." Mark read that message out loud, his voice dripping with a bitterness that seemed to slice through the very air, leaving a metallic taste in my mouth. "No more lies," he repeated, staring blankly at the wall, his eyes glazed over with a mixture of disbelief and profound disgust. After 6 months of nothing but lies, they want to build a relationship on truth. The irony was a cruel, twisted joke. It got worse. Much worse. It turned out Sarah had been feeding Ethan intimate details about Mark, things only a wife should know, vulnerabilities shared in the sacred trust of marriage. She told him about Mark's insecurities at work, his anxieties about providing for his family, and even private moments of vulnerability in their bedroom. Ethan had mocked Mark in the texts, using the information Sarah provided to make himself feel superior, to elevate his own twisted sense of self-worth. "She's using you," I said softly to Mark, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They're using us both as punchlines to their private jokes." In that moment, something shifted in Mark's eyes. The raw grief, the crushing disbelief, hardened into a cold, steely resolve. It was a transformation I recognized, a mirror of the quiet strength that had awakened within me just an hour prior. "You know what?" he said, standing up from my sofa, his voice now firm, devoid of its earlier tremor. "It's time we go upstairs and have a conversation." His gaze met mine, a silent understanding passing between us. 2 strangers forged into an unlikely alliance by the fires of betrayal. We stayed seated for just a second longer, Mark and I, 2 victims of the same heinous crime, bonded by a trauma we never asked for, a shared wound that had irrevocably altered the course of our lives. It was strange how suffering could forge such an instant, profound connection between 2 people who, until an hour ago, were merely polite neighbors who exchanged waves at the mailbox. "You know what hurts the most," Mark said, his eyes fixed on a framed photo of our 4 families grilling in the backyard, a relic of a happier, more innocent time. "It isn't just that she cheated. It's that she made me an accomplice without me knowing. Every time I let her come over here because she said Eleanor needed company. Every time I watched the kids so she could help you with a project. Every time I let you cook dinner for the 4 of us, thinking we were friends. I was facilitating my own betrayal. His words resonated deeply within me, echoing my own unspoken thoughts. I had been an accomplice, too. Every time I worked overtime so Ethan could relax at home. Every time I defended Sarah when Mark complained she was going out too much. Every time I celebrated how lucky I was to have such wonderful neighbors. We had been unwitting pawns in their cruel game, our trust weaponized against us. "It's not our fault," I said, the words a balm for both our wounded souls, as much for myself as for him. We operated with integrity. They chose to betray us. Mark nodded slowly, a grim understanding settling over his features. But now we get to choose how we respond. He was absolutely right. This was our moment, the crucible in which we would decide who we would be in the wreckage, whether we would crumble or rise from the ashes. We climbed the stairs together, side by side, united by a grim determination I had never felt before, a shared purpose that transcended the individual pain. For the first time all day, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman who had just discovered her spine, a formidable strength I never knew I possessed, now radiating from my core. As we reached the hallway, the sounds emanating from the master bathroom had changed dramatically. It was no longer the desperate, hushed whispering of conspirators, but a full-blown argument, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the pressure of their confinement. "This is your fault," Sarah hissed through the wood, her voice shrill with accusation. "You promised me she never came home for lunch on Tuesdays." "My fault?" Ethan shot back, his voice rising in an indignant crescendo. "You were the one who insisted on coming over today. We could have waited until tonight like usual." "I'm sick of waiting," Sarah screamed, her frustration boiling over. "I'm sick of cheap motels and rushing around. You said you would have had the papers ready by now." Mark and I exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of their pathetic display. Even now, trapped and exposed, they were turning on each other, refusing to take responsibility for their own heinous actions, their true characters laid bare in their panicked recriminations. "Eleanor, I know you're out there," Ethan yelled from inside, his voice laced with a desperate plea. "Please, we can settle this in a civilized manner. Let us out, and we can talk like mature adults." Mark stepped up to the door, his shadow falling across the wood, an imposing figure of righteous anger. "Ethan," he said, his voice deeper and more terrifying than I had ever heard it, resonating with an authority that commanded attention. "This is Mark. I think you and my wife have some explaining to do." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, a palpable tension that filled the hallway. "Mark." Sarah's voice sounded small, like a child caught stealing candy, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Mark, honey, please let me explain." "I'm waiting," he replied, his calmness mirroring my own earlier state, a chilling composure that spoke volumes. "It isn't what it looks like," Sarah stammered, her words a pathetic attempt at denial. Mark let out a short, dark laugh, devoid of any humor. "Sarah, you are naked in our neighbor's bathtub with her husband. Exactly which part of that isn't what it looks like." But then Ethan spoke, and what he said sucked the air right out of the hallway, a new layer of insult piled upon the mountain of betrayal. "Mark, Eleanor, look, you have to understand. This is more complicated than you think. Sarah and I, we fell in love. It wasn't planned. It just happened." "In love?" I repeated the words in my head, a fire igniting in my chest, hot and consuming. They fell in love while lying to our faces for half a year, while plotting our financial ruin, while mocking our trust. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of their declaration, was breathtaking. "We knew it was messy," Ethan continued, his voice now sounding almost self-righteous, a twisted attempt to justify their despicable actions. "But we couldn't control our feelings. We wanted to tell you both. We were just waiting for the right moment." Mark slammed his fist against the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet house, a visceral release of his pent-up rage. "The right moment?" he roared, his voice trembling with fury. "You mean like after you signed the lease on that townhouse you already found? After you made sure Eleanor wouldn't get a dime in the divorce? After you decided if my sons would live with you?" The silence on the other side of the door was deafening, a damning confirmation that we had hit the bullseye, exposing the full extent of their calculated conspiracy. "How do you know that?" Sarah whispered, and in her shaky voice, I could hear the dawning realization that her carefully constructed fantasy was collapsing around her ears, her world imploding. "Text messages," I replied simply, my voice cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. Very detailed, very illuminating. What followed was a chorus of desperate backtracking, a pathetic attempt to minimize their actions. Ethan yelled that the messages were taken out of context, a flimsy excuse that held no weight against the mountain of evidence. Sarah insisted she never seriously meant to move the kids, a transparent lie designed to elicit sympathy. Both of them tried to shrink the enormity of what we had discovered, attempting to make it small enough to forgive, to sweep under the rug of a mistake. But Mark and I were done listening to their spin, their pathetic justifications. We stared at our phones, reading message after message that documented not just their physical affair, but their financial and emotional conspiracy against us. A betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. "Eleanor," Mark said quietly, leaning close, his eyes meeting mine with a shared understanding. "Does your phone have a voice memo app?" I nodded, understanding his plan instantly, a cold smile touching my lips. "Good," he continued, a steely glint in his eyes, "because I think you should record some of these confessions for our lawyers." I pulled up the app, hit the red button, and tapped gently on the door, a subtle signal that the rules of engagement had irrevocably changed. "Ethan, Sarah," I called out, my voice clear and resonant. "Could you repeat that part about being in love, and maybe clarify the timeline about waiting for the right moment to leave us destitute? My divorce attorney is going to find this fascinating," I added, a hint of dangerous amusement in my tone. The panic in their voices as the legal reality of their situation finally set in was the sweetest sound I had heard all year, a symphony of their crumbling world. Mark and I walked back downstairs, leaving them locked in with their recorded confessions and their rising terror, the sound of their frantic whispers fading behind us. We sat back down on the sofa, two people who had woken up with very different lives that morning, now forging a path through the wreckage together, united by a shared purpose. "What do we do now?" Mark asked me, his voice still tinged with the shock of revelation, but now infused with a newfound determination. For the first time since I had turned that doorknob, a genuine, albeit grim, smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but a smile of recognition, of self-discovery. I realized I wasn't the defenseless housewife they thought I was, the pathetic, oblivious woman they had so cruelly mocked. "Now," I said, checking the battery level on my phone, a practical gesture in the face of overwhelming chaos. "We give them exactly what they deserve." The game was far from over. It had just truly begun. I started building a call list, my fingers moving with a deliberate precision I hadn't known I possessed. My lawyer, Mark's lawyer, our respective bosses, all needed to be informed, to understand why we wouldn't be returning to the office that afternoon, or perhaps ever again in the same capacity. And then, a name popped into my mind, a name that brought a fresh wave of cold satisfaction. Sarah's mother. "You're going to call her Mom?" Mark asked, his eyebrows raised in surprise, a flicker of awe in his eyes. "Her mom watched her kids yesterday while Sarah pretended to be sick," I reminded him, my voice flat and unwavering. "She deserves to know why she was really babysitting." Mark nodded slowly, a grim understanding settling over his face. "You're right," he conceded, a new resolve hardening his features. "And I'm going to call Ethan's boss. I'm sure he'll be interested to know why his VP of sales has had so many doctor's appointments lately." It was time for the consequences to catch up with the actions, for the intricate web of lies they had woven to unravel, exposing them to the harsh light of truth. Over the next hour, Mark and I orchestrated a campaign of total transparency, systematically dismantling their carefully constructed deception, piece by agonizing piece. First, the lawyers. My attorney was practically giddy when I described the mountain of evidence we possessed. "Eleanor, this is gold," she told me, her voice buzzing with professional excitement. "Documented adultery, conspiracy to hide assets, and confessions on tape. Ethan won't be able to dictate a single term in the divorce. You have all the leverage." Mark's lawyer was equally optimistic about his custody chances, assuring him that Sarah's actions would weigh heavily in his favor. The legal battle, which I had once dreaded, now felt like a strategic game I was fully equipped to win. Then came the harder calls, the ones that tore at the fabric of their personal lives. Sarah's mother was utterly devastated when I explained, in calm, measured tones, why her daughter's marriage was ending. I always felt something was off, she confessed, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sorrow. Sarah has been so distant, so secretive lately. Ethan's boss reacted with professional fury when he learned his employee had been faking medical emergencies to meet a married woman. That is a severe violation of company ethics, and it's essentially theft of company time, he assured me, his tone cold and unyielding. There will be immediate HR implications, likely termination for cause. While we made these calls, the noise from the bathroom intensified, a cacophony of their escalating desperation. Ethan and Sarah had cycled through every stage of denial and panic, from making flimsy excuses to begging, then to threats, and finally, back to pathetic pleading. "Eleanor, please," Ethan shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. 8 years of marriage has to mean something. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. "Mark, Caroline," Sarah sobbed, her voice cracking with feigned remorse. "Think about the boys. Don't destroy our family over one mistake." One mistake, I repeated to myself, a bitter taste in my mouth. 6 months of calculated lies, of mocking our trust, of plotting our financial ruin, and she dared to call it one mistake. "You know what?" I said to Mark as I hung up the phone, a new surge of power coursing through my veins. "I think it's time to let them out." Mark looked at me, surprised, a question in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Completely," I replied, feeling a surge of unshakable resolve. "But first, we have to set the stage for the grand finale." It was time for them to face not just their spouses, but the full, unvarnished weight of their reality. I climbed the stairs for the 3rd time that day, but I was a fundamentally different woman. I wasn't the naive Eleanor who had come home for lunch, blissfully unaware of the serpent in her garden. I wasn't even the angry, heartbroken wife who had discovered the betrayal. I was the narrator of my own life now, taking the pen back, reclaiming my story from the hands of those who had tried to write my ending. Mark followed me, his presence a silent testament to our shared resolve, and we stood before the bathroom door. The noise inside had ceased entirely, replaced by a heavy, dreadful silence, the sound of people realizing their world had irrevocably ended. Before I turned the key, I looked at Mark, my eyes meeting his across the hallway. "I want you to know something," I said, my voice low but firm. "This experience changed me forever, and certainly not in the way they expected." Mark nodded, his eyes reflecting the same steel resolve that had hardened in my own chest. He told me quietly that this nightmare had shown him he was stronger than he ever believed possible, and I knew exactly what he meant. We had both been forced to confront the deepest parts of ourselves, to find resilience in the face of unimaginable pain. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the key. It was the same key I had turned in a blind panic just an hour ago, an instinctive act of self-defense when my world was collapsing. But now, as I held it tight, the jagged edges digging into my palm, it represented something entirely different. It was no longer a tool for hiding or confinement. It represented my conscious, deliberate decision, not just to open a door, but to unlock a terrifying and beautiful new chapter of my life, a chapter where I was the author, not a character in someone else's script. I took a deep breath that filled my lungs with a sudden surge of clarity, a profound sense of purpose. "Ethan, Sarah," I said clearly, my voice ringing through the wood of the master bathroom door, resonating with an authority that left no room for doubt. "You are going to come out now, but you need to understand that the rules have completely changed." I turned the key in the lock, the click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house, a definitive punctuation mark on the end of their reign of deception, and I stepped aside, allowing the door to open. The door opened slowly, almost hesitantly, revealing 2 people who looked nothing like the competent, arrogant figures I had locked in there. The steam from the shower escaped with them, carrying the faint, sickening scent of my expensive body wash that Sarah had felt entitled to use. They were no longer the secure, conspiratorial lovers who had plotted to dismantle our marriages over secret lunches and stolen afternoons. They were just 2 shivering, exposed people who had just realized they had gambled everything that mattered and lost, their faces etched with the stark, brutal reality of their consequences. Ethan came out first, wrapped hastily in one of our plush white bath towels, his eyes red and rimmed with panic. wearing the expression of a man who was finally calculating the true cost of his arrogance. Sarah followed him, clutching a matching towel around her chest, trembling violently. She was shaking, not just from the damp cold of the air conditioning hitting her skin, but from the crushing realization that her life, as she knew it, was effectively over, her carefully constructed world shattered beyond repair. The power had irrevocably shifted, and they were now at our mercy. Ethan reached his hand out toward me, a reflex born of 8 years of intimacy, but I recoiled as if he were made of fire, a visceral rejection of his touch. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice calm, dangerously calm, a tone I had never heard come out of my own throat before. "You have absolutely no right to ever touch me again." Mark stood beside me, a towering pillar of judgment, his presence a silent reinforcement of my words. Sarah tried to speak, her voice cracking with desperation. "Mark, honey, please just let me explain." Mark raised a hand, stopping her before she could spin another web of lies. "There is nothing to explain, Sarah," he said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth she was used to, replaced by an icy finality. "You have already explained everything very clearly in your text messages. You explained it in your coordinated plans to move in together. You explained it in the way you laughed about how clueless Eleanor and I were. We had seen them naked in every sense of the word. We had seen them physically exposed in my bathtub, but more importantly, we had seen them emotionally naked in their begging, and morally naked in their pathetic excuses. They held no power over us anymore because they held no mystery. The secrets that had fueled their affair were now the ammunition for their destruction. "Sit down," I ordered, pointing to the edge of the king-sized bed that Ethan and I had shared for nearly a decade, the very bed that had been defiled by his betrayal. "Sit down because you are going to listen to exactly what is going to happen next." They sat on the edge of the mattress like scolded schoolchildren, their heads bowed in shame, and for the first time in 8 years of marriage, Ethan did not argue with me. He did not question my authority or try to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. He was finally listening, but it was far too late for it to matter. "First," I began, pacing slowly in front of them, watching them shrink under my gaze, "you will both get dressed, and you will leave my house immediately. Ethan, you can come back tomorrow to get your essential belongings, but you will only step foot on this property with a police escort or a neutral witness. I am changing the locks tonight." My words were precise, each one a stitch, weaving a piece of my dignity back together. "Second," I continued, feeling every syllable solidify my resolve, "our lawyers have already been briefed on the entire situation. The text threads, the audio recordings of your confessions through the door, the timeline of your financial maneuvering to hide assets. Everything has been documented and backed up to the cloud. Ethan, your little fantasy of leaving me with nothing during the divorce has just turned into your legal nightmare." I watched the color drain from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly, the full weight of his impending ruin finally registering. "Eleanor, surely we can come to a civilized agreement," he stammered, trying desperately to find his footing, to regain some semblance of control. "Civilized?" I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. "How was it civilized to spend 6 months planning how to ruin my financial future? How was it civilized to mock me in private messages while eating the dinner I cooked? How was it civilized to use our home, our bed, and our life as a stage for your betrayal?" Mark stepped forward, taking over the narrative with a cold precision that matched my own. "Sarah, your mother already knows why you really needed her to watch the kids yesterday. Your boss knows why you have been leaving work early so often to meet him. And the children will know that their father fought to keep this family together, while their mother decided to burn it down." "You cannot tell my children," Sarah protested, a sound of desperate panic rising in her throat, the only thing that seemed to truly break her composure. "I don't have to tell them anything," Mark replied with a strength I had never seen in him before. "Actions have consequences, Sarah, and yours are going to ripple through your family for a very long time." It was then that I did something neither of them expected. I walked right up to Ethan and looked him dead in the eyes, my gaze unwavering. "Do you know what hurts the most about all of this?" I asked him softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that you cheated on me. It's not that you planned to steal from me. It's not even that you used my own home to deceive me." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was suffocating, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. My voice gained power with every syllable. "What hurts the most, is that you completely underestimated who I am." Ethan looked at me, confused, blinking rapidly, unable to comprehend the transformation before him. "For 8 years, you treated me like I was weak, like I was stupid, like I was incapable of standing up for myself. Your entire plan hinged on me being the pathetic, oblivious wife you thought you married. But I was never that woman, Ethan. I just needed something to wake me up." I turned my head to look at Sarah, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "And you, Sarah? You called yourself my friend while you plotted to destroy my life. You laughed at my innocence while I opened my home and my heart to you. You thought I was too dumb to notice the signs. But here I am, standing tall, and you are the ones who have lost everything." The transformation was complete. I was no longer the woman I had been that morning, the one who worried about making the perfect pot roast. I was someone entirely new, someone who had found her voice, her spine, and her ability to stare betrayal in the face and emerge victorious. "Now," I said with a finality that sliced through the air, "I want you to get dressed, leave my house, and never come back. Your story together started with lies, and it is ending with consequences. My story is just beginning." Mark turned to Sarah, his voice firm. "You have 1 hour to pack a bag of essentials and leave our house too. The lawyers will handle the rest." It was the most powerful moment of our lives. When they finally shuffled out the front door, looking small and defeated, Mark and I stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the debris of what our family lives had been. But strangely, I did not feel devastation. I felt a soaring sense of liberation, a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "How do you feel?" Mark asked me, turning to face me, his eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and a nascent hope. I thought about the question for a long moment, listening to the profound silence of the house, a silence that was now truly mine. "I feel like I've been reborn," I answered honestly, "as if I've been sleepwalking for years and finally just woke up." Mark smiled, a genuine tired smile that reached his eyes. "Me too. It's strange, isn't it? We should be on the floor crying, but I feel stronger than I have in years." He was right. The betrayal, as agonizing as it was, had been the catalyst we needed to discover who we really were. We were not the idealized, foolish versions our spouses had created in their heads, but capable, resilient people. That evening, after Mark went home to face his own challenges, I sat alone in my house. But I did not feel lonely. I felt free. I walked through every room, reclaiming my space, my sanctuary, my life. This house would no longer be the scene of a crime. It would be the place where a woman found her strength and decided to rewrite her history. The months that followed were a period of total reconstruction, a deliberate rebuilding of my life from the ground up. The divorce was actually easier and faster than I had feared, thanks to the mountain of evidence Ethan had so generously provided in his text messages. He had no leverage. He couldn't take a dime more than he was entitled to, and he lost the ability to hide assets, which resulted in a very favorable settlement for me. But the most important victory was not legal or financial. It was personal. Every day that passed without Ethan was a day I rediscovered who I was without the constant, subtle criticism of a man who had spent years diminishing my worth. I went back to school in a way. I signed up for abstract painting classes that I had always wanted to take, but Ethan had called a waste of time and money. I traveled alone, taking a road trip up the California coast just to watch the ocean, feeling the vastness of the world and my place within it. I made new friends who knew me as the strong, independent woman I had become, not the submissive wife I used to be. Mark and I maintained a special friendship, bonded by the shared experience of discovering our power in our darkest moment. He flourished after his divorce, too, finding time to be the father his children needed without the complications of a toxic marriage. 1 year after that Tuesday, the day I started calling the awakening, I ran into Ethan at the grocery store. He looked older, tired, and worn down. His relationship with Sarah had not survived the guilt, the shame, and the financial ruin brought on by their own actions. "Eleanor," he said, stopping his cart near the produce section, his voice laced with a hollow regret. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him and realized with a jolt that I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no hate, just a profound, liberating indifference. "I know," I answered, realizing it was true. "But I don't need your apology, Ethan. Your betrayal gave me the greatest gift you could have ever given me. It showed me who I really am. Today, as I share this story with you, 2 years have passed since that Tuesday that changed everything. My house has been completely renovated, not just physically with new paint and furniture, but energetically. It is now truly my sanctuary, filled with art I have created, books that inspire me, and memories of adventures I took on my own. The betrayal did not define me. My response to the betrayal defined me. I have learned that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are actually the most liberating. Sometimes our world has to fall apart so we can realize that we have the power to build a new and better one. Not all endings are happy in the traditional sense. My marriage ended, my trust was abused, and my life was turned upside down. But I found something much more valuable. I found myself. To every woman listening to this who feels lost in her own life, who feels invisible or unappreciated, who believes she doesn't have the strength to change her situation, I want to tell you this. Your strength is there, waiting for you. It just needs the right moment to wake up. My story is not about revenge. It is about rebirth. It is about discovering that sometimes when we think we have lost everything, we are actually on the verge of gaining everything. The betrayal gave me my freedom, and my freedom gave me my true life. If this story touched your heart, or if it made you reflect on your own inner strength, then it has served its purpose. Because every woman deserves to know that she is more powerful than she believes. It has been a true pleasure to have you here, and to be able to share my journey with you. My dear friends, if you've made it this far, I know you understand the raw, visceral impact of these moments. This journey, this awakening, is something deeply personal, yet universally resonant. If my story has stirred something within you, if it's made you pause and reflect on your own strength, then please, take a moment to connect with this community. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It truly helps these stories reach more women who might need to hear them. And more importantly, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Eleanor's journey so far? Have you ever faced a moment that completely redefined your understanding of trust? Share your experiences, your insights, or even just a simple hello in the comments below. Your voice matters here, and your stories are just as powerful. What themes would you love for us to explore next on this channel? Your suggestions guide our path forward.